left. Okay. John Willis, followed by Keith Hardini, followed by Arthur Shopper. Okay.
Okay. John's gone. Okay. Well, if you want to see the result of factions, that we certainly have a lot of them here in this room. I think it's really amazing because when I talk to my students in school, I'm often trying to get them to understand the importance of making the case and in a reasoned response, which is what I try to do. That's why I call it Civics 101. C.S. Lewis once said that without the aid of trained emotions, the intellect is powerless against the animal organism of passion, human passion. And I think that is altogether true because we see it demonstrated here in this room each time. You know, I just want to commend Mr. Bonner. I thank you very much, sir, for your reasoned response. You made a very excellent case in the points that you made. And I think it's funny how right after he did that, we still see all of the subjective opinions of self-interest and passion, which the Founding Fathers put in place. That's the reason they put into place the separation of powers, which each would have ambition to control ambition. In other words, each of you have your duty based on the Constitution and natural law, which is what we should all be subject to. So I thank you very much, Mr. Bonner. That's what I wanted to make my point. Thank you.
Thank you. Arthur Shopper, followed by Julie Ali, followed by Alexandra Morales.
Yes, my name is Arthur Shopper from Torrance. I will concur. Judge Bonner, most people forget that at one time. I do appreciate your comments. I'm very glad to hear these. I'm appalled and shocked. People could commit bribery and be able to stay in the country. That is outrageous. Assaulting a juror, outrageous. This sounds more like a promotion for cartel violence. I am extremely concerned about this. Now, I am offering an extended invitation. Sheriff Villanueva, you ran out of that town hall. Prove me wrong. I want you to look the community where I come from, the South Bay community. We have crime problems too. We have burglaries. We have immense concerns. We've had people killed in the streets of Redondo Beach. I want you, and I want the ad hoc committee, this is a formal invitation, to come to a South Bay region. Carson, I think, would be the most appropriate. I know the county has a lot of investment there. I invite the ad hoc committee, come to a location in Carson. That's close enough for that area there. We want more reports, we want information, and we need you to hear from everybody. Last of all, I counter the concerns that Mr. Vera has shared. I've spoken with immigrants in Cudahy and Huntington Park. They came legally. They have nothing to fear from law enforcement, and they don't want sanctuary. I don't know who you're talking to, but you're not talking to enough people in Los Angeles County.
Thank you, Julie Ali, followed by Alexandra Morales, followed by Joseph Maislich.
Thank you to the members of the ad hoc committee. Your report is a good start. I think, sorry, I'm close to my hands with this. Thank you to the members of the ad hoc committee, and the report's a good start, but I think cooperation with ICE should be minimized at every turn. Just for a little background thing, my family has experience with arbitrary detention. My grandfather was in Dachau, and made it out. My father came as a refugee at the age of 13, and this is very important to me. Refugees should be supported, and I think, sorry, I'm nervous. So I think LASD should not provide ICE with any more information than is absolutely necessary, required by law. I think the dates of them getting out should not be publicized. I just think it's a horrible thing. And I have to say that I respect Mr. Bonner, but I don't agree with anything he said. So, thank you.
Alexandra Morales, followed by Joseph Maislich, followed by Milena Jankovic.
Good morning. I'm here on behalf of GARES and the Central American Research Center, a nonprofit organization that advocates with vulnerable immigrant communities at the local, state, and national level. I am here to note that it is very concerning to us that there really hasn't been any policy change in the Sheriff Department. And there is no doubt that the election outcome of a change in LASD leadership was a direct community cry for a shift, a meaningful shift in practice towards our immigrant community. Instead, we have not seen a genuine shift. Also, and the overall result is still the same, that we continue to participate in using our county resources to feed the deportation machine and to continue to separate families. LA County is a leading county that other regions look for guidance in facing challenges and overcoming them. More importantly, we must choose to lead with our county values at a time when our values are being tested at every single level of governance. And your vote is an opportunity to do so. We are committed as a nonprofit organization to collaborate with you to ensure that we are protecting our county families, all the while being fair, transparent, and upholding our moral values. Individually, as a U.S. citizen, voter, UC Berkeley graduate, I can't stress enough how much of a trigger it is as an Angelino to even be in this room with law enforcement because of the trauma that we have inherited in our community from past administrations. And I really hope that you are an agent of change and that break the cycle for not only my generation, but for future generations. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Joseph Mazlich, followed by Milena Jankovic, followed by Andres Juan.
Hello, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Sheriff, for attending. I think that's pretty important. The word and the term sovereignty has been used here. I'd like to make it work. I think it should work in the other direction from the way it's been used. You know, that's not the direct activity of the commission. But let me quote retired Marine General Smedley Butler. I helped make Mexico, especially Tampico, safe for American oil interests in 1914. I helped make Haiti and Cuba a decent place for the National City Bank boys to collect revenues in. I helped in the raping of half a dozen Central American republics for the benefits of Wall Street. The record of racketeering is long. I helped purify Nicaragua for the International Baking House of Brown Brothers in 1909 and 1912. I brought light to the Dominican Republic for American sugar interests in 1916. These things, when a government interferes with the sovereignty of other lands and peoples, it is conceding the moral right to part of its own. So that's part of the background on which these issues come up. Let's remember, it's a condition of shared sovereignty that's been undertaken by policy, and in fact, the very land that we stand on is an illustration of armed robbery. Now, how does, let me pass from that. And so I'd like that to moderate some of our attitudes. Unintended consequences was mentioned by Judge Bonner, and I hope that the issues he's brought up are talked about just in the way that you folks are planning to do it. Okay, I thought that was, anyway.
Milena Jankovic, followed by Andres Juan, followed by Kate Lewis.
Good morning, Commissioners. Just two very quick procedural things. First of all, a shout out to staff that gave us this improved comment card. This is awesome. And also a comment about Mr. Bonner's multiple interjections during the conversation about the agenda item that is being removed. I simply don't understand why is he allowed to speak several times. All the other commissioners are abiding by the bylaws and everybody's being respectful and respecting the community time as well, except for him. So, if he uses this time to push the same agenda, it's an anti-immigrant agenda that he keeps pushing over and over again. And I think at some point we should, you should consider issuing a warning. For Mr. Rivera, thank you for all your work on this complex issue, and thank you to the Ad Hoc Committee. I understand why you need more time. I hope the report will come out quickly. And lastly, for Mr. Villanueva, what community asks for and what you actually promised very loud and clear is ICE out of jails, not ICE uniforms out of jails. By removing, the ICE uniforms and replacing them with contractors, you're really doing a disservice to your department, and you're damaging the public trust that this commission is actually working really hard to reestablish somehow. I believe this really harms the public safety as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Andres Kwan, followed by Kate Lewis, followed by Fanny Herman.
Andres Kwan with the ACLU. Commissioners, we support your work on this urgent issue and would urge you to act swiftly in the days ahead. We know that Sheriff Villanueva was elected in great part based on his promises to do way better by immigrant community members and rebuild trust. He promised to bar ICE from all LAC property and to strengthen SB 54 protections for county residents. And to Mr. Warner's point, that we are trying to go well beyond SB 54, well, sir, that's the whole point. It's a discretionary floor for the entire state, and we deserve better in LA, where a third of our community members are immigrants. This morning, community organizations working on immigrants' rights sent the Board of Supervisors a letter setting forth our deep concerns with Sheriff Villanueva's deviation from his campaign promises. As the OIG reported, his policies will actually have little impact, if any at all. In particular, barring ICE agents but giving free access to ICE contractors, what real difference does this make? It's a difference that is cosmetic only, with the same result. It's a bait and switch, creating a false sense of security among immigrant community members who now mistakenly believe LAC is no longer in the business of doing ICE's bidding. LAC recently transferred a father of a young boy. The family member we spoke with was shocked to learn LAC under Sheriff Villanueva is still very much facilitating ICE's mass deportation agenda. Finally, in 2018, LAC transferred 222 individuals, but a quarter of all transfers based simply in misdemeanors. SB 54, which was watered down from a much stronger original version, allows for this. Under no math system can we call going from 3 qualifying misdemeanors in 2017 to 101 misdemeanors a reduction. That's called an expansion. Thank you.
Heini Herman, followed by Michelle Infante, followed by Shannon Camacho.
Good morning. My name is Heini Herman. I come here from Brenda, Oregon. The sheriff's current transfer procedures are essentially illegal in contravention of current California state law and therefore place LA County at risk of great legal liability. The relevant laws are California Penal Code Section 830.85, which reads, notwithstanding any other law, United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement officers and the United States Customs and Border Protection officers are not California peace officers. This is effective January 1st, 2018. The other law is the California Penal Code Section 831.6, subparagraph A. A transportation officer is a public officer, not a peace officer, appointed on a contract basis by a peace officer to transport a prisoner or prisoners. Essentially, the ICE transfer program, as described by the Los Angeles County Inspector General report, are illegal under California law. To perform a legal transfer under current law, transfer officers must be appointed on a contract basis by a California peace officer. ICE and Homeland Security are definitely not California peace officers. Thank you.
Kate Lewis, followed by Michelle Infante, followed by Shannon Camacho.
Hi, thank you. My name is Kate Lewis, and I'm a third-year law student at UCLA. I'm a member of the Immigrant Rights Policy Clinic at UCLA. In my clinic, we've done substantial research about sanctuary policies around the country. Contrary to Commissioner Bonner's suggestion, policies that disentangle ICE from local law enforcement actually make cities and counties safer. This is because, as people have mentioned, when community members see their law enforcement cooperating with ICE, they are less likely to report crime and work with police investigations. Studies back this up. This is a fact. This is why I support the ad hoc committee recommendations number 9 and 10 to end transfers to ICE. I also support strengthening the recommendations to bar private contractors from jails and courthouses. No one is fooled by people performing the duties of ICE but wearing different t-shirts. Any cooperation with ICE or ICE contractors is a voluntary choice to aid President Trump's anti-immigrant agenda, which LA County voters firmly rejected by electing Sheriff Villanueva. My clinic has done research also about the posting of release dates and times on the public website. This is a voluntary and harmful practice. I can appreciate Sheriff Villanueva's concern for the family members of inmates, but counties across the state manage to avoid aiding ICE in this way, and LA County should too. LASD should revert to its pre-2017 policy of making this information available to inmate families and victims via a phone call instead of a public database. By electing Sheriff Villanueva, we voted for an LA County that treats. Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle Infante, followed by Shannon Camacho.
I want to talk about mental health because that's something that no one's come up here and talk about with regards to immigration. I started a support group a year ago, and it was for families that were indirectly impacted by incarceration trauma. I started with one person, and now I have over 30 people that come to my support group. And recently, I've noticed that I've had a lot of people from immigration come through. And what they talk about is the fears and the isolation that they have because they're very hard workers. They don't have mental health or medical benefits, so they don't have anywhere to go. And so they've come to my support group that Dignity and Power now has to receive support from other families that are going through the same thing. Their isolation is, it's traumatic to see these people. They come and they feel so isolated. They have nowhere to go, no one to talk to, and they don't trust the department. And I would hope that you would think about the trauma that's being caused to these families with deportation and their families inside your jails because they can't even go to you and discuss the incidences and experiences and the trauma that their families are experiencing inside because they're afraid to come to you because they're going to be deported. So I would ask that you would think about that. Think about having a conversation with some of these community members that I'm talking about. They would like to come to you and talk to you how they're feeling so that you can have an understanding of what they're going through.
Thank you. Our last speaker, Shannon Camacho.
Good morning. Thank you. My name is Shannon Camacho, and I work with Chairla, the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights. I'm here to urge the Sheriff and the Commission to remember that when we talk about public safety, it is often our immigrant undocumented communities that feel the least safe and not guaranteed the same protections as other residents. I echo the sentiments already expressed about how our communities live in fear. Family members are terrified of any potential interaction with police and sheriffs because of the anti-immigrant hate they experience. Sheriff, our families and allies voted for you to protect us. We need meaningful reform, not just optics. During the last COC meeting in February, the LA County Office of Inspector General presented some information. They stated that the total number of LASD transfers to ICE had gone down from around 1,000 in 2016 to 950 in 2018. But it's important to note that the number of qualifying misdemeanors under SB 54 has increased from 0 in 2016 to 120 in 2018. Additionally, the Sheriff announced that he would decrease the number of SB 54 qualifying misdemeanor convictions from 151 to 101. Although that may seem like a reform, I would like to remind the Sheriff and the Commission that in 2016 there were only 3 qualifying misdemeanor convictions. All of that is to say that we must not go backwards or superficially inch towards reform when it comes to the Sheriff's policy regarding immigration. Our communities are very aware of the policies that affect them, and optics are not enough to gain their trust. I urge this Commission to go beyond SB 54, which is the starting point for our communities. Like folks have already said, transfers under SB 54 are discretionary. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next agenda item, but I just want to remind everyone that we're going to respect the process of the ad hoc committee, which is going to go back to their current recommendation and review it through the process of communicating with the Sheriff's Department and others as needed, and as soon as they meet and can come up with their revised proposal, we will then slate the next time to have this discussion, but most importantly, hopefully at that point, we will urge an adoption. We'll have a vote. We'll have a vote on the topic. Yes, Sheriff.
Yeah, two points arose that there might be some misperception. One is the removal of the uniformed ICE agents from the jail. The contractors are always present. because ICE agents themselves do not do the transfer of inmates, the transportation. That is a company that actually all of the federal agencies use to transfer inmates to federal custody. And they do not do any of the interviews, they do not do any of the enforcement. They're just a contractor that transports inmates. And however, we did find out that ICE was engaged in fishing expeditions inside the county jail, particularly Inmate Reception Center, where they could interview anyone. So they actually, the removal of them is a step forward towards the legislative intent of SB 54. So I would not discount that. And the second point, on the public website issue, there's another group of people that benefit from it. And this is, we're going to continue to assess the situation. However, victims of crimes, the suspect is now set to be released, particularly in domestic violence, stalking, sexual assault. They want to know when the perpetrator is going to be released, and that is a very important public issue. So it does serve multiple purposes, not just a narrow one, just for information.
Thank you for that clarification. And Sheriff, I just want to say that a lot needs clarifying, not only on this topic, but other topics. Things dribble out. Reporters write articles. We get presentations. So I just want to encourage as much transparency and communication as possible, particularly with the ad hoc immigration committee. And can we get a pledge from you that your people will meet with the ad hoc on immigration?
Actually, we will arrange that, yes.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Okay, now let's move on. Thank you, everyone, for today. Let's move on to item 3B, which is an actual presentation by the LA Sheriff's Department on the secret deputy subgroups. And I'll just remind folks that back in, it was the summer, I think it was July of 2018, at a COC meeting, former Sheriff Jim McDonald provided an update on the steps that he was going to take to address this potential existence of groups, these groups within LASD, and that there would be a comprehensive study conducted by the LASD in partner with the County Council and the Office of the Inspector General, and including bringing some outside experts to study the department, this issue within the department. And we created an ad hoc committee on the deputy clicks also. So today we're going to hear an update on where we are with this topic. And I believe it's under Sheriff Murakami, who's going to address us, along with Miss Elizabeth Miller from the County Council. Do I have my notes correct? Very good. All right. So I'd like to welcome under Sheriff Murakami and Miss Miller. And thank you for joining us this morning.
Good morning. So I'm Elizabeth Miller with the County Council's office, and I've actually just been asked to give you a quick update on the history of the study and sort of where we're at today. I know many of you are actually familiar. Mr. Williams actually attended at least one of the meetings of the work group. But for those who aren't familiar, it was about 2 years ago in the late spring, early summer of 2017, when a collaborative effort began between County Council, the Inspector General, and the administration of former Sheriff McDonald, who assigned a representative to the project to really sort of join together to try and figure out how to get a handle on this issue of deputy subgroups or cliques, some of whom may be associated with a tattoo. I know it's been reported that some of those groups have existed maybe since the 1970s, and there's been repeated criticism of the Sheriff's Department, and that would include multiple administrations of the Sheriff's Department for not doing more to investigate it or do something about it. So what became apparent as this work group got together is that it's not nearly as easy to really investigate and get a handle on this as it might first seem on the surface. When you start looking at how you're going to investigate, there are a lot of nuances to that. You're talking about sworn peace officers who have not just protections of the Peace Officers' Bill of Rights, but also protections that all of us have under the First Amendment. So a lot of thought, research, discussion went into how to approach the subject, and it was determined that really to get a clear and accurate understanding of exactly what we're dealing with, we needed to bring in a third party who would be objective and really didn't have a stake in the outcome. There are a lot of basic questions that obviously need to be answered, and I think we looked at all of those questions. How widespread are these groups? Are there a handful, or do they exist at every station and every unit in the department? How does one join? You have to be invited to join, or are you just a member by virtue of being assigned to that unit? What behavior do these groups engage in? Or is there an initiation? Is there specific conduct required to join? Are there hazing activities? And how do they treat members of the community, and how do they treat members of the department but who are non-members of that group? How did the groups form? Why do they form? And what motivates someone to join one? So it was, if we could get a clear understanding of the true answers to those questions, we'd have a much better idea then how to act going forward, what action would need to be taken. So in order to find an outside group that could do the study in an objective and unbiased manner, we looked for academic groups, think tanks, subject matter experts, and a lot of research was done into those groups, and ultimately groups were brought in and interviewed, and that selection process was underway, and that is when the election approached. And the movement forward was kind of suspended at that point in anticipation of the election and the outcome. So now that we have had the election, we have a new sheriff, the Board of Supervisors has requested that the study go forward, and hopefully that will be done with the support of line deputies and the unions, because ultimately it's the reputation of those deputies that's really at stake here, and hopefully they will support the study and the outcome and can believe in the credibility of the study and the outcome. So I will leave it to the Sheriff's Department now to talk about their position moving forward.
And thank you. My name is Chief Matt Burson. Work our Professional Standards and Training Division. And pretty much County Council has said it all. What you need to know is this administration is taking a proactive approach to addressing the stigma associated with deputy clerks and putting more responsibility on the leadership of their respective commands. And acts of abuse to the law, our department policy and procedure manuals, core values, not to mention our oath as law enforcement professionals, will not be tolerated. Considering this is a new administration, I personally was not advised by my predecessor of any comprehensive study of deputy clerks prior to her departure. However, I do realize the importance of this issue as it relates to transparency and public safety. And moving forward, I can assure you this administration will ensure that its members will conduct themselves with the highest degree of integrity, earning the public's trust and support. Thank you.
Okay, I think we'll take some questions from the commission, but I'm sorry, I didn't see you there. Sorry, Murakami.
It's okay.
Please.
Basically, I want to let you know, too, the department's moving forward in terms of preventative measures, developing training for young deputies not to get involved in such behavior. And even though right now we can't prohibit it to get, say, a tattoo, but we can let them know about the negative connotations of obtaining one. And it's not perceived as a positive. But like Chief Burson said, we've taken positive steps towards dealing with the problem at a certain station, which was identified where they had a fight. That's currently under internal criminal investigation. And then at the station itself, we're having an internal affairs investigation in terms of some members of the subgroup involving possible hazing. And also we also moved some of the leadership of the station. The sheriff believes, and I believe also, the problem has to do with leadership, to the point where the command staff of the station should be aware of the situation and needs to deal with it appropriately. So that's the steps that we're doing now as far as holding our leadership accountable for any type of misbehavior. So that's what we're doing so far.
Okay, well, we're going to open it up to questions. I've had a hard time getting my questions in here today, so I'm going to take the first stab. I'd like to ask, and maybe it's Ms. Miller who knows this, or if you know it, sir. I'm trying to follow the timeline of when McDonald's said, we're going to get on this, and there was going to be an outside group hired to look into it. And then I think I heard today that because of the election happening, election happening, it was halted. I'm just wondering, was it officially halted? And at one point, did the board say, okay, stop this? And then the board said, okay, start up again. Maybe we could have some clarification. It seems very, or the way I understand it, it seems very nebulous to me.
Sure, I apologize. There was never any official stopping. It didn't stop.
Okay.
It was just sort of suspended because of the election coming up. So in anticipation of wanting to have whoever was going to be sheriff on board, it's just been suspended, but it's never been stopped.
Okay, but has there been a group identified? Are we still going with this outside group to be hired to come in? Yes?
Yes.
And does that process to interview these folks starting from scratch, or do you have somebody in mind?
Well, I can't talk about specifics, but it's not starting from scratch.
Okay. Okay.
What's the timeline?
I think some of that will depend on how the sheriff wants to participate in that, and as soon as the group gets back together and starts working, we'll get that group on the outside think tank or subject matter expert on board, and we'll start moving forward.
Yeah. What is the group? Is it you use the term group? What is the group?
So the working group has been representatives from County Council, the Inspector General's office. As I mentioned, Mr. Williams has attended meetings, and sheriff's representatives.
Okay. Okay. Commissioner Rubin?
Yes. As chair of the ad hoc committee on deputy secret subgroups, we obviously in the community have a great deal of concern. There's been a lot of publicity emanating from a recent claim being filed out of a group, the Banditos from East Los Angeles. And it seems from Chief Burson and also Under Sheriff Murakami that the focus from the department is on East LA. And based on our historic information, this is much more widespread than East LA. And it is not, I don't mean to denigrate the work you may be doing in East LA, but this appears to be from historical information and from anecdotal information that we and others have received so far, that it involves other groups at other stations. So with that in mind, what is the department's intent to examine this issue and clean it up, if you would, countywide?
Well, basically, as of right now, we're dealing with behavior. Groups, which can be considered to be fraternal-oriented subgroups, have existed since at least the 70s that I'm aware of. But certain groups like Linwood, the Vikings, and this group now currently at East LA Station have taken that behavior into a different avenue. So we're actually, right now, we're dealing with the behavior. So we're tightening down as far as the leadership of stations to kind of monitor the workplace for any type of behavior which is similar to what we see in East LA, and basically just to snuff it out. And that could either be administrative investigations, movement of certain personnel, but the behavior we're dealing with right now, some of these stations is unacceptable. So our mission is basically to end it. You know, like I said, like Liz Miller said from County Council, when it comes to some of these groups, the First Amendment or things kind of make it a little bit tougher. So I think what I'm looking more, and the sheriff's looking more, is actually the behavior of certain people and dealing with that. And once we deal with that, it sends a strong message out to others that essentially we're not playing around. You know, it's not acceptable to the department or the community, so we're going to deal with it.
Thank you.
You know, I think one of our most important charges, the COC, is to build trust between the Sheriff's Department and the community. Do you have any intention of putting out to the public your plans, what you're doing, maybe even a little bit more specifically, this retraining or these statements that's unacceptable to do these behaviors? Let the public know what some of these behaviors are, specifically that you have discovered. You have any intention of bringing more clarity to the topic for the community?
Well, I think some of the issues when it comes to internal affairs get regarded in terms of privacy rights and peace officers' bill of rights. But some generalities, which we can, I think is a good idea, let people know that we are aware of, or when we become aware of situations, we're going to deal with it accordingly. And also the education we're trying to do is in terms of letting younger deputies know not to engage in such groups, you know, as a negative. It sends out a negative message. And plus, I know the media's here too, so an article will be written about what I'm saying. So.
Let me
Okay. Yeah, sure.
Let me expand on what the undersheriff was saying. The very, very first act that I did in office was to remove from command the captain of the station in question. That was the very, very first thing I did on December 3rd, because I lost faith in his ability to lead that organization, that unit. And likewise, we did an assessment of the leadership, and we made personnel decisions. We're not going to disclose what they were, but transfers were affected. It sent a very loud and clear message. And during the course, in fact, when this new complaint arose about the bandidos at Cap, about 3 weeks ago or so, we reconvened all the personnel involved about what the decisions were made, what was happening with the case in that station in particular. And we came across a memo that was written back in June. It was a supervisor inquiry where there's recommendations made to conduct internal investigations because of some very serious allegations of hazing. No action was taken at that time. As soon as I read this memo and I asked the group, what actions are we taking? They initiated action. They initiated appropriate administrative action that should have happened way back before the fight happened September 29th. It might have even prevented the issue from happening. But the whole issue stems from a long developing. This precedes my previous administration. This goes back to actually Lee Baca's days, where hazing was allowed to flourish, particularly with the relationship between field training officers and trainees. In certain stations, it was more prevalent than in other stations. And that continued to fester and fester, and it evolved over such a long period of time that ultimately supervisors at the rank of sergeant, lieutenant were part of the problem way back 10 years ago. And they were now in a supervisory role in the same environment with the same mentality that was acceptable. That was, in fact, you can save yourself a lot of money on your studies, because that is going to be the conclusion of the whole thing. This is hazing run amok that went unchecked. It was an absolute failure of leadership, top to bottom, because they didn't take the issue seriously. We are taking the issue dead seriously. We're making the changes. We're looking at all the manual policy and procedures, any areas that we can tighten in terms of hazing and retaliation, where we can tighten and hold people accountable when we establish the facts. We're definitely going to do that. And we're communicating the message loud and clear to every single unit on the department, in particular the units that have large cadres of field training officers and trainees, or in custody training officers and trainees, because that tends to be the area of greatest concern. The issue of tattoo or not, or names or not, is pretty much irrelevant. It's an intergenerational rivalry,
and it is all centered on hazing that went unchecked for a very, very long period of time. And we're going to stamp that out, and that's going to be the final analysis, what needs to be done and what we're currently doing.
When you say hazing, could you clarify, because if I remember back in the day, sororities and fraternities, hazing was you ate goldfish, live goldfish, or you did these stupid, silly things, which occasionally got out of hand. So when you're talking about hazing, and also you had to do it to become part of the group. You had to go through those steps to become part of the group. So could you explain what the hazing means in terms of a sheriff's department?
Well, hazing by policy definition, let's focus on the training environment. Any type of activity that is not conducive to maintain a proper learning environment for the trainee constitutes hazing. And that could be overworking a person to the point they can not possibly complete the task, and that actually impacts public safety. Because now you have victims of crime that are waiting for deputies or first responders to show up and take their report, but they're being held up because they have a bunch of other things that they're stacked up trying to do. So that is one element of hazing. Another element of hazing is, and this happened, is where the trainees were forced to buy lunch for the training officer or for the whole shift. They called it taxing. And that is hazing. And other antics, more along the sorority line things, and some of those are harmless, rites of passage. You get the worst job as a trainee, that's nothing unusual, there's nothing harmful about that, because the job someone has to do. And of course, the rookie gets the worst job. But when it goes beyond the necessities of the job into something that actually damages the work environment, generates undue stress, because this is a stressful environment to begin with. To be a trainee in a patrol environment, doing an entire new line of work in a very challenging environment where you actually face physical threats, and if you're unsuccessful, it could lead to your termination. That is stressful enough. So adding an element of hazing on top of that makes it unbearable, and we've actually lost employees along the way because of that. And that, again, is a failure of leadership. Your field training officers were not properly supervised. That means your watch sergeants or field sergeants weren't monitoring the desk, weren't paying attention to the workloads of all the individuals involved. The watch commanders are not paying attention to how many trainees were working way past the end of the shift without compensation in violation of FLSA. All these things happen over a long period of time, and that became part of the culture. In fact, part of the culture was, well, if you're a good trooper, you're just going to suck it up. And if you don't suck it up, well, that means then you're looked frowned upon because you didn't suck it up, because if I did it, my predecessor did, how come you can't? Somehow you're less of a deputy. And that, unfortunately, was the negative aspects of the culture. But it was existing side by side with some of the phenomenal things the deputies are doing, where they're doing really, really good police work with very, very few resources. I mean, they're stretched thin, they're overstaffed, working multiple shifts day in, day out, putting their families on hold, literally, to get the job done. So a lot of good things are happening, but a lot of bad things were happening at the same time. Now we have to unravel this thing in a way that continues to promote public trust in what we're doing, and importantly, internal trust. The deputies are going to be valued and appreciated for what they do. They're going to be supported when they're doing the right thing and held accountable when they cross the line and do the wrong thing. So it's an ongoing process. We're not going to wave a magic wand and make it disappear overnight. Sir?
No,
I think Priscilla.
Commissioner Oversight, we've got a pecking order right now.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here, Sheriff, and thank you for the presentation, Under Sheriff. One thing I think is interesting is the use of language and how it's shifting. Now we're referring to this as subgroups rather than deputy cliques, which I think is interesting because it makes it seem like this problem is more benign than it actually is. I have subgroups, of friends. I have subgroups, right? It's not benign when we're talking about what's happening with the culture of violence, right? It's not just about workplace antics or things that are unpleasant in the work environment, which certainly should be taken up by the Sheriff's Department, because everyone should have a workplace free of harassment. Everyone should have a workplace free of hazing. But what we're describing in these deputy cliques or gangs is not just harassment in the workplace, it's violence against members of the public. And that's what the LA Times has documented. That's what litigation against the county has demonstrated. And I think we need to be clear about that. It's not just workplace antics, which again is itself a problem, but we're going beyond that. The other question I have is, what, in addition to the personnel, so the first question I have for you, Sheriff or Undersheriff, is in addition to the personnel changes that you made at one or two substations, what sort of mechanisms do you have in place to encourage people to come forward, to report the activities of these kinds of cliques, and to ensure that when people do come forward that they will be protected, right? Because this seems to be a significant problem. It's not just about the cliques, there seems to be a general problem within law enforcement about sort of the blue wall. And so it seems to me, if that's the case, that the Sheriff's Department needs to take extraordinary measures to send the message that we want to hear from folks when these sort of cliques are operating, and that we will, one, reward you from coming forward, and two, make sure that you are not retaliated against. So I think the point about retaliation is really important. The other thing that I just want to, so that's my question. My general comment is similar to the comment I made on immigration. This, I think, Commissioner Bonner reminded me that this issue has been festering for 2 decades or more. And it strains credulity to think that we don't know what the problem is, right? After 2 decades of this existing in the same department, for people to act like we have, what's going on? It doesn't make any sense to me. So people know what's happening, and the question is there political will to uproot the problem of these deputy cliques? And I hope that we do have the political courage and that we have the sense of urgency around this, because again, people are being hurt, the rule of law is being undermined, and the reputation of the Sheriff's Department is being tarnished. I have a lot more to say, but I'll stop there.
You had a question though, did you?
My question is, so here's the question. The question is, what is being done to encourage reporting and to protect people who come forward?
We actually have policies and procedures in place to report any type of misconduct or harassment or hostile work environments. Either be through their command chain or it could be through what we call a policy equity violation,
right,
or it could be done through internal affairs. Once those things are in place, an inquiry is conducted.
But my question is more specific. Is there any initiative on the part of the Sheriff's Department to encourage reporting specifically about deputy cliques, not just about general workplace issues?
No, that falls under that category.
So no.
We don't specify cliques per se.
I understand that,
Yeah.
but what we've been talking about is an endemic problem that has existed for decades in the department, and obviously the general reporting process isn't sufficient. So what I'm asking is, are there initiatives to develop targeted outreach to encourage, especially young deputies, either on patrol or in custody, to come forward, or not even deputies, non-sworn staff, anyone who essentially sees something, say something? Is there that level of an initiative around this problem? If this is a priority, are you doing that kind of targeted outreach around deputy cliques specifically?
That, and specifically what you're saying, I'd probably say no. But we are, like in some of these stations, the management staff, the supervisors, they're walking around contacting the trainees, be sure that they're properly being treated. They're checking the workplace, ensure they're not working after shift, and ask them why. And it's always been a concern of mine when I had a station that is how they're being treated. I also had an open door policy, you can come talk to me. And if they do report it, we actually had a policy to protect them. A non-retaliation policy. Once they lodge a complaint, they're basically protected. And like for instance at East LA Station, where we had some parties lodge a complaint, each one was talked to by the chief and their captain about do they feel safe in the workplace. Had they not felt safe, we would take types of action to move somebody out. But they all said that they feel okay, pretty much as a result of the changes we've taken. So a lot of people are watching what's going on right now, and I think that's encouraging them to step forward. There's another station where we're hearing of possible treatment of trainees, so we're taking action on that too. Right now it's in the inquiry stage. If we validate it as they're being mistreated, it's going to go into an internal investigation.
And just a follow-up on that, have there been any discussions about changes in terms of training orientations, especially for, again, trainees or younger deputies, around discouraging the formation or invitations
Yes.
to cliques?
We do want to do that. Some type of training for the newer deputies about the pitfalls of involving yourself in such groups. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be involved in any type of misconduct, but the perception is not one that we want to present. So make them fully aware of that, as a private person or whatever it may be, if you want to get a tattoo, I guess right now you could, but it's not the best choice.
We're going to go to Commissioner Rubin and then to Commissioner Bonner.
Have there been any written policies developed since December as to how the department is proceeding on its investigation on deputy secret subgroups, or I guess my question is, what written policies have been developed within the department to assure the public that the sheriff is taking this seriously?
I'm not aware of any changes to our current policies, but what we're doing is actually enforcing the policy that exists. We're actually operating within the scope of our abilities to manage the station. So in terms of any behaviors that were reported, like I said, it's either being investigated criminally or by internal affairs. And then, whenever we speak publicly, we assure people that really know we are aware of the situation and we are dealing with it. It's not being swept under the rug. And like the sheriff said too, one of the first actions taken was the removal of the captain of the station. So we're not looking at just the actions of the involved deputies. We're also looking at the leadership. It's a failure of leadership not to recognize the problem and deal with it. Is allowed to fester and grow. So it's a little more broader than just dealing with individual deputies.
Add a couple to follow along that line. What we've done in the last 4 months is probably more action in regard to this than probably the last 20 years, because we've isolated and identified the problem, and now we're trying to engage in proactive steps to address it both at the leadership level, the investigatory level, and the policy. And this is true of all past sheriffs. It's very difficult to pin down a policy that survives constitutional muster when you're dealing with something as in joining a group or wearing a tattoo or not wearing a tattoo, because there's a very strong First Amendment protection. Even in the workplace, it still exists. So we haven't found that one yet. However, I will be putting a policy statement that we will introduce into the manual policy procedures regarding the negative attributes associated with cliques. Now, in regards to deputy gangs, as you say, there's a legal definition for gang, and that we do not have met that. We have not met that. That's 3 more acting in concert to further an illegal cause, and we have not got that. In the past, that was true in the 1980s. This is 2019. We have 23 patrol stations. We have 67 units on the department, and if I have any evidence of anybody, any group of people by any name engaging illegal activity, we're gonna take that on head on, and we'll unturn every single rock possible, make sure we get to the bottom of the issue and hold those accountable if that's in fact what they're doing. But we have to do it based on facts and evidence, not based on past history.
Thank you, Sheriff.
I certainly would agree with the sheriff that this is a very difficult a very long-standing issue endemic to the Sheriff's Department that goes back at least a couple of decades. I served as a commissioner on the Citizens Commission on Jail Violence, and one of the things we looked into, this is 5 or 6 years ago now, was the existence of deputy cliques, both within the county jail and in patrol. The focus was county jail, of course. So I think there's reason to believe that deputy cliques currently, I mean, there's at least some reason to believe they go beyond the Bandinos in East LA. I think there's some reason to believe that there's a deputy clique that's operating in Compton Station. There are the Vikings, I think, that are still in existence. Again, these are questions we need to look into. All right, I'm getting some disagreement. I think the regulators are still around. But in any event, I think the key point is here we have a lot of things we've got to learn to get really a handle on this problem. And by the way, I mean you, Sheriff, and of course I think to the extent the Oversight Commission and the OIG can play a role in that, we should. The behaviors, we want to tame the unacceptable behaviors that arise from deputy cliques, and if anyone wants to know what those behaviors were, at least as of 5 or 6 years ago, read the CCJV report, Chapter 5. They're pretty well described there, and some of those unacceptable behaviors were insubordination, code of silence, use of unnecessary and excessive force, sometimes as an initiation right into the cliques, and so forth. So this is a deeply embedded cultural issue that is going to be tough to root out. But I think since it goes back actually to the Colts Commission of over 20 years ago, it's time that we really understood it, all of us, including particularly Sheriff Villanueva, and that we get on top of it. So I would advocate, rather than waiting, we raised this issue with your predecessor, and we delayed. And we've delayed, and we've delayed. And I personally would advocate that the Office of Inspector General, with COC involvement, that is with staff and with the commissioners that are part of the Deputy Cliques Ad Hoc Committee, that we move forward to get answers to the questions that Ms. Miller posed, and we not waste any more time doing this. If and when there's a consultant or a third party that is ultimately retained, we can integrate them into the process. But I say wait no longer on this one. And lastly, here's my question. I'd like to know, under Sheriff Murakami or Sheriff Villanueva, I'd like to know whether the recommendations regarding the deputy cliques that were made in 2012 in the CCJV report, they're in Chapter 5, whether they have been implemented or not. And if they haven't been implemented by now, I'd like to know why not.
Well, I'm actually new to this position, but to my knowledge, they've never been implemented. Like the sheriff said, the recent activities, as far as I'm aware of, to deal with these groups. Until now, they really haven't been confronted per se. I think the last time we had anything would have been, I think you guys got the report on the Linwood Vikings. That was an issue that was addressed. But as of right now, I'll go back and I'm sure to review that and see what it is and see what we can do. What our goal, I said, is to meet these problems head on and put an end to them. Like I said, I don't think anything's been done until the sheriff came in office. And I think we've been pretty aggressive. And what I believe what I'm seeing is that the rest of the department is watching what we're doing. And our strong response to this is going to send a message throughout the stations. So the film you eat, and we're not playing around.
I just want to say thank you, Sheriff, for being here today, and want to make it just speak for the record that you've been here since the opening of the meeting today, and I think that's commendable. We've never had that in the past administration, so if there's any silver lining today, thank you for that. I want to echo what Commissioner and Vice Chair Ocean was trying to get to the bottom of, other than, if I can say it my way. And let me preface my statement by saying we know it's not a quick fix. It's not going to go away overnight. You didn't get into it overnight. You just came into office. But with other than the removal of the captain of your first order of business, you make the statement that you've done more in 4 months than has been done in 20 years. Is that documented? Is it subject to review? Can we scrutinize what you've done within these 4 months as it relates to this issue, as opposed to what's been done over the course of 20 years? And in old adage, the devil's in the details, just for us to see. I think one operative word that keep coming up is initiative. What are the incoming initiatives that parallels with the past administration? Is the vision of McDonald as it relates to the secret deputy subgroups in conjunction, or does it mirror your vision? What's the variations? I'm just curious to know. I'm hearing a lot of chatter, but the devil is in the details. I don't hear any details as it relates to what's actually been done.
Well, I can tell you this. We inherited a criminal investigation from the incident that happened on September 29th. And that process is scheduled to be wrapped up by the end of this month, and we will have a case to present to the district attorney. Once we do that, well, that's factual. We've also initiated 3 separate administrative investigations as a result of the memo that surfaced from June of last year that should have been initiated in June of last year when it was written. However, we've now initiated that 2 weeks ago. So we have those 2 ongoing. Obviously, we can't disclose the details. Those are confidential personnel issues. But we're now moving forward to disseminating information to all the station captains. In fact, we'll share with this commission all of our communications that are going between my office and Mr. Murakami's office and the station captains in the field operations regions. So you'll see what we're communicating. So you'll have your hands around the information we're putting out, and we can finally craft a policy statement for the manual policy and procedure. We'll present that to you. In fact, we'll even ask for your input on the process. If you care to lend us an idea that we can incorporate that, again, has to survive the constitutional muster.
I would like to echo Commissioner Thompson's praise in that I do appreciate the fact you are here. We didn't typically get that before, and I think it's monumentally important that you don't just hear us, but you hear the public. But it's also important that we hear you. So I really do appreciate the fact that you are here and interacting with the commission, so thank you very much for that. I am wondering, though, I am hearing that there have been, the word is out that the Banditos at East LA are being disbanded, they're being transferred out. If people want to come to East LA, they should make that desire known. And I totally appreciate the confidentiality of personnel matters, but I'm wondering if you could provide to us some idea of, have there been 10 administrative transfers of deputy personnel? Has there been 1 or 2 transfers, administrative transfers of supervisory personnel? We know you got rid of the unit commander, and that's a major first step. So I applaud you for that, but we also know it goes way deeper than that. And I'm just wondering, can you give us any indication that, yeah, as a matter of fact, I've transferred 10 people out of there. I've taken that step. Can you give us anything like that?
I believe the current tally right now is 7, and the number is expected to grow.
Thank you.
Thank you. As part of your review, I'm wondering if you have had an opportunity to examine the leadership of the Sheriff's Department. This is actually a question I asked to Sheriff McDonald, so I'll be an equal opportunity person and ask you the question as well. Do any of the supervisors or leadership of the Sheriff's Department have any tattoos that are associated with deputy cliques? And if so, how many? Or I can pose it to the undersheriff as well.
I have not asked that question of my leadership, and that would be an entirely inappropriate question to ask of them. And that is a private personnel matter for them. I'm wholly confident that anyone who's in my staff right now, whether they have a tattoo or not, have not done anything to indicate there's any type of behavior associated with it that would be detrimental to the organization or the community.
Sure, but I'm not asking about tattoos generally. I have a tattoo, right? And I said that before. So I'm not asking about tattoos. That is a very personal matter. But I am asking about tattoos that have been documented and associated with certain cliques. And that is something, I think, slightly different. I'm wondering, do you think that is a private matter?
It still remains a tattoo. It still remains a private matter. Unless I can connect it to actual criminal conduct in a pattern that then it represents a concern and a liability. Outside of that, I still don't get there. In other words, just like an arrest, how do I get to the dope that's in someone's pocket? There's only a legal way to get there. You have to go steps A, B, C, D. You can't just jump in, find the dope in the pocket, aha, and then try to recreate the way that how you got there. Same idea. I have to have the legal means to establish that.
Commissioner Vera.
I wanted to follow up on one of Commissioner Bonner's last point, a very good one. I think that to the extent that we have years of great work with the Citizens Commission on this issue, it seems like a no-brainer for the ad hoc committee and for this body to bring those back up, see if they're still relevant, whether they need to be tweaked or added onto. But let's not just leave all that work, in a drawer. Given that the issue is now still so relevant, given, as Commissioner Olson's questions revealed, there isn't expressed changes in policies that have been affected, and given that there's a strong will on behalf of the new administration to be more proactive on this, it seems like a no-brainer for this body to really bring those recommendations back, see if there are other best practices around the countries. What are other administrations doing to be more proactive, to get better reporting, to be better at protecting deputies that report? I think we should bring those back and then vote on them and make them part of our resolution so that they go further. And I think only that way can we add value to all the work that's been done on that.
Sheriff, I'm just wondering, when Ms. Miller made her presentation, there was sort of an open question because of the election and your election as to whether or not you and the leadership of the Sheriff's Department would participate in and welcome a outside third party to do a study of the broad issues and broad questions about whether there are deputy cliques, how many there are, where are they, what behaviors do they lead to, particularly negative behaviors, if any. Would you be fully supportive of participating in the selection of a third party to do that kind of an outside study?
By all means, but actually not a but just as an additional, the fact that there's cliques, subgroups in any station, any paramilitary organization, heck, there's fire departments that have them too. Police departments, LAPD has them by division, and it's part of the culture that people join paramilitary organizations. They tend to do these, exhibit these behaviors where they tend to group themselves in like interests. And I worked at East LA Station during the time where they were called the Cavemen. I was never invited to be one. However, I worked with them, next to them, and I was never treated any differently than them. But by today's definition, they would classify as a clique. However, they were entirely benign. They had no impact on how the community was treated. They were preceded by the Red Devils, which is the one from the 70s. They're probably the first one in the department. And they were succeeded by the Bandidos. And if you know, these are generational. And it has a lot of, probably more of an interplay of generational conflict than the actual name of a group. And it's something that once we study the whole issue and our sociologists, start looking into it, they'll realize, yeah, there is a lot of, has to do with sociology and intergenerational conflict.
To
it's more just of a comment. And I get this is your experience with, having observed cliques, but I feel like the way that you just described it in some ways undermines what we're trying to do, which is to say that it was benign as you observed it. And it might have been how you observed it, but again, we've had communities say that they've experienced these cliques as abusive. And especially in communities like, Compton or East LA that are already disempowered, especially vis-a-vis law enforcement. I'm concerned that these communities are essentially having these cliques operate because we just neglect the communities generally. And I know that that's not the message that we want to be sending to East LA or Compton or any of these other substations where these cliques have operated. I hope that we will send the message that whatever anyone's personal experience has been, that this will not be tolerated, which goes back to my question about the tattoos that are associated with cliques and the fact that it hasn't even been asked. As you are trying to root out this culture, it just it seems to raise a question about credibility and sincerity as we're trying to take on this very serious issue.
I will say that we are dead serious on rooting out the issue, the behavior that's presented. And going past the behavior into something else is where we are going to follow the First Amendment, and then we'll face another set of liabilities. And we're not going to do that. But I would also urge caution that unless you actually do a survey of the community and a valid survey, statistical analysis of community perceptions, and make sure you cast a very wide net, it's very easy to assume what a community believes or doesn't believe, but that's only your own perspective. You have to actually have hard data by doing a survey, knock on a bunch of doors, and have a validated survey. Then you can start having a perception of how important an issue is with a community or with a subgroup of a community. Ones that might be impacted by the activities of law enforcement, but you have a bunch of other people that never impacted by law enforcement living in the same community that have entirely different perception. So you have to balance the notion of what we're doing, how the public perceives it, because it's a very, very large public. That's all I want to say.
If I might, Sheriff, we hear quite a bit from the community here, either at our meetings here or at our town hall meetings, or we have individual community members who will give us information about what's going on the street. And so I want to sort of buttress Commissioner Ocean's question and ask it again, perhaps in a different way. When we talk to members of the community, they will tell us that their perception of the deputy subgroups is that for the deputy to become a member of the subgroup, they have to take certain actions in the community. Sometimes they will stop a community person and say, you know what, I'm a member of such and such, and here's my tattoo. Or they'll take some action that perhaps may not be constitutionally valid, and they'll flash that tattoo, sometimes akin to a gang sign. And so the question is, and you mentioned the community engagement, what specifically can the Sheriff's Department do to further engage the community to find out that perspective that you just talked about? Whether it's a survey, whether it's using our town hall meetings process or our community meetings to find out what the perception is and what the actual actions were of the deputies in terms of the community engagement as it relates to the community, rather to the deputy clique secret society issue. So it is an issue that the community has. It's an issue that we've heard over and over that the community says, well, the deputies had to do steps 1, 2, 3, and 4 to become a member of this group or to get that tattoo, and that perception is still out there. So that's something that we have to address. I think we cannot let that be a part of this entire study that we're doing.
I would like to quantify that, and obviously anybody who did something like that, for example, say they're working in Crescenta Valley, they're handling a case and they say, I'm so-and-so from some clique, I'm deputy so-and-so from Crescenta Valley, I have a huge problem with that. And if it comes to your attention, anyone's attention, please direct them our direction so we can take appropriate action on that, because that is totally unacceptable, and we need to quantify that.
mean, and I think if the department is offering to fund a in-depth study of the views of the public, I'm sure that folks would welcome it, especially in East LA or Compton. So I do hope that the Sheriff's Department will support doing that kind of a comprehensive study of public perception.
Okay, I have just one last question. What do you, Under Sheriff and Sheriff, what is the term that you use to call these groups who may engage in behavior that's not suitable for the department? There's a lot of pejorative names out in the community that they're called, but there's subgroup, clique. So when you're talking about it to all the personnel, what's the term that you use to discuss this topic?
Sometimes I could call it a tattoo group or a station group or some kind of subgroup or clique. I mean, there's different terminology that you can use, but I think everybody fully understands what we're talking about. And again, we're going to work on the message going out to the guys that don't have one. It's better that you don't get one. It's not conducive towards good relations with the public, and it sends out a negative connotation. So we're going to highly discourage it, and that's one of the things we're trying to do at the forefront.
So you name it as a tattoo group, a subgroup, a clique. You actually use those words when you're doing your training and orientation, or even when you're doing your admonishments. Those are the terms that you use. You actually use those terms.
Myself, I usually just call them sometimes by their name. For instance, if you're talking about East LA, I call them banditos. Actually the name itself. And what it is too is that, just so you know, back in the 80s, I worked East LA Station. And the behavior that's going on there now is not acceptable. And all the old guys are not happy with the way that the station has been painted because of the behavior. And that's not East LA. That's not the culture. And somehow, in the last, I don't know how many years, it got subverted to what it is now. And I said a lot of veterans are going back and stop by the station, talking to the guys at the station saying, that's not East LA. You guys are not East LA. You're doing something else stupid. But it's not the conduct of what we represent. So.
Okay, good. Thank you.
If I could just piggyback on that. Whether you call it tattoo group, subgroup, clique, somehow at the moment, because of all the publicity and because of the claim filed, Banditos doesn't seem to fall in any of those categories. So do you call it a gang?
No, by definition, it's not a gang. It's just like what it is. It's a group within the station, and even within the totality of the banditos, I don't know how many there are. But my belief of why our requires investigations is not the group itself. There's a small portion that have broken off and doing their own foolish acts. So it's not a group in totality. But we never never use the terminology gangs. That'd be a misnomer.
Okay, everybody. Thank you, Under Sheriff. Oh, I'm sorry. Forgot. One more.
Well, as one of those old guys, and I'm proud to be one, you're right. We're very disgusted with what's going on. It's definitely a very different world today than it was way back when. And I think we all need to be aware of that. I'm going to use that dirty four-letter G word here, and that's the gang word. And the reason I'm throwing it out here is because there's certain members of this commission and certain members of the public, if they aren't sitting out there right now, they have been here previously and used that dirty four-letter G word about your deputy sheriffs. And it kills me to hear it just as much as I'm sure it kills everybody wearing a uniform in this room to hear it. But it is out there. When you talk about they don't meet the criteria, I'm not quite so convinced that that is necessarily the case. And I know the perception by a significant number of the public share in that view. They think they do meet the criteria. So I know you're taking this seriously. I appreciate that. We all need to take it extremely seriously because it is really putting a taint and it's tarnishing the badge that many of us wore proudly and continue to wear proudly, and we need to really make sure that that type of conduct does not continue. So thank you.
Okay, right, yes, thank you very much for this conversation, and I'd like to reiterate Commissioner Bonner's point about let's not wait for some brain trust to be hired. Keep doing what you're doing. Hopefully County Council, the OIG, and our ad hoc committee with the Sheriff's Department can all work together to keep pushing this forward, because obviously this is of grave concern to not only the Sheriff's Department, but the entire Los Angeles community. So now we're going to move to taking some public comment on this topic.
Okay, our first speaker, Paul Sugg, followed by Joseph Maislich, followed by Irving Alvarez.
Hi, I guess we're getting ready to close the day out. I do appreciate you being here all day, though. I will say that. That's normal to see. So, but as I said before, I can't vote, but if I I would vote to abolish the Sheriff's Department for different reasons. In any case, subgroup, groups, misnomer or not, I think if you took that badge away from those people and they still did those same things, what would community say they are? What would penal code define them as? Penal code define them as a gang. Right? So if I was out in the streets intimidating people with two of my friends that happen to be from my same neighborhood, you could say they're from corner block of whatever corner, doing these same things, intimidating people, beating up on people, we would be labeled a gang. What difference is that if I carry a badge or not? It's still being a gang. Right? They're out there doing things, and I've seen them do things, they even have names. Vikings, jump out boys, banditos. These are things you name people inside neighborhoods that get called gangs. Why can't we just apply that to law enforcement? If you want to apply the law and be fair about how you apply the law, apply it to yourself. Please do. You should prosecute yourself sometimes while you're at it. We have a big chalkboard, 2 of them in our space, that are full of names of people that have been killed by cops in LA County. The names are very small. They're about this big, and we have 2 chalkboards full of them. And that's just from 2000 to 2016. A lot of them were killed by LASD. So let's apply the law fairly. They're gangs killing people, and should get prosecuted for doing so.
Joseph Maislich, followed by Irving Alvarez, followed by Milena Jankovic.
Thank you for the careful description of all the efforts that you're making on this subject. And I'd like to suggest again, like previously, a point about context. When a phenomenon persists, or even get worse, over years, despite even sporadic efforts, but more systematic efforts recently, we look to see, are there some unnamed factors that are involved that are burdening the system and impairing the successes of the efforts that are being made. I look to see, well, what's different in society now? The inequality is much graver. That certainly burdens law enforcement and every social entity, every government entity. This is not to excuse the behaviors that are being discussed, nor to accuse anything like that. I'm just saying that the stresses and burdens that are on both the law enforcement officers and the community members make more difficult their interactions. And there's much that can be done in government to work on that context, and I think it's very fair for the Commission to comment on those things too, and how they affect the work that you're doing. What I say is if the system is weak in its moral standing, well, what happens? When the moral force is weak, there's a tendency to make up for it with the physical force, of course. Thank you.
Thank you. Irving Alvarez, followed by Milena Jankovic, followed by Piney Herman. Milena Jankovic?
Thank you. I too want to acknowledge the language that we are using in this conversation. You know, things like subgroups, antics, benign, even clicks. It does seem like we're bending over backwards to not use the dirty G word. I want to also acknowledge sort of that paradigm shift that we're finding ourselves in. You know, the previous administration went at great lengths to show that they were actually doing something when they were doing nothing. And I believe Sheriff Villanueva criticized this heavily during the campaign. You know, under Sheriff LaBerge and other folks, they held us hostage here for hours at a time with these long choreographed presentations about how things were being done. We don't see that now. We see sort of like an opposite approach where no information is given whatsoever. We saw last month Commander Moore Hong give a 6-page PowerPoint presentation. One was in thank you, and the second one was the title page. And you know, today we got very little information from this conversation until the commissioner started asking some questions. And I have to really commend the commission for asking questions about the details, the scope, the length of this problem, and all the other questions that are being brought up here today. And I even agree with Commissioner Bonner and his attempt to infuse some sense of urgency in this discussion with this problem. And I am happy to see that we went from trying to engage in preventative action to you will be consulted in this process. So I'm very happy to see that, and thank you very much, Commission, for your questions.
Thank you. Piney Herman, Michelle Infante, followed by our last speaker, Regi.
Hello, I'm Kenny Herman from Bend, Oregon. Most police departments are quasi-military organizations. Police officers wear uniforms, they'll guns, they carry ranks. A typical policy for a police department would be beards are uniformly not allowed as they are visible to the public. Another, while on duty, no tattoo, branding, or body piercings are at any time allowed to be visible to the public. Arguably, the visibility threshold is when they become a public issue through publicized transgression and notoriety of a group of officers. At that clearly defined threshold point, it should be placed on a formal undesirable administrative and Sheriff's Department policy list and might be considered in geographical assignments to separate similarly tattooed officers, and this be documented in personal decisions. Just from a typical policy, tattoos, brandings, body piercings, for example, body piercings anywhere above the shoulders are prohibited. You can prohibit people from doing things to their body if you are a quasi-military organization, as is the Sheriff's Department. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle Infante, followed by Regi.
Stop calling it a clique. It's embarrassing to be out in the community, out here in the audience, and hear each one of you commissioners, with the exception of Commissioner Harris, to be calling them a clique. It's ludicrous. And for you to come up here and you to be calling it cliques, Sheriff Villanueva, it's embarrassing to hear you even say that, and for you guys to even put those words in your mouth and express them to the community. They're gangs. They're the same as what my 4 brothers did when they were in the 70s. They were in a gang. It's a gang. That's what it is. So stop doing them a favor by telling them over and over again and agreeing with them that it's a clique. It's not a clique. It's a group of men who go out, traumatize the community, and get away with it. It's the same thing, Sheriff Villanueva, that the community has out in public. Only thing is that you have it in the department. It's a gang, and do something about it. Stop calling them cliques. They're not. They're traumatizing people. They're hurting people. They're killing people. It's a gang. It's a gang. Please say that. It's a gang.
Reggie?
I think that it's unfair that the system gets to respond after the violence happens. Because when they took those folks off camera and beat them with flashlights, that wasn't a click. Saturday, March 30th, we're going to be lifting up the name John Horton, who was murdered inside of LAST jails.
10 deputies.
10 deputies surrounded him and beat him to death. That's not a clique.
2,000 boys, 3,000 boys. They're gangs.
That's not a clique. These grieving moms, families, they're not a clique either. Nor do they want to be heard that the people who murdered their loved ones are simply called a clique.
It's a gang.
Think about the weight of the violence that has already happened.
Thank you. So now we're going to move to discussion of the March 18th correspondence to Sheriff Villanueva. We sent a letter to the sheriff inviting him to be here today. We're so appreciative that he did come. And we outlined some things in this letter that we are concerned about. The issue of the deputy reinstated after it was dismissed for allegations of domestic violence. The Truth and Reconciliation panel. There was a series of topics that we're very interested in, we're concerned about and very interested in knowing more about, and also some of the activities of the department itself, which I'm hoping we'll get to. It's on the agenda too, to hear about some of the programs and how they're doing. So before we move on to give the sheriff an opportunity to respond to the letter, I'd like to ask the commissioners if you have any comments about the letter, anything you want to say that wasn't already said in the letter. Anybody?
Thanks for sending it.
I agree.
Okay.
Yeah,
Commissioner?
I'd like to hear from the sheriff.
Okay. All right. Floor is yours, Sheriff.
I received the letter dated March 18th, and let me just go kind of in chronological order based on the content of the letter. That's probably the easiest way to do it, since it kind of covers a lot of different subjects. On the first part, we were talking about partnership and reforms, and you speak about the Prison Rape Elimination Act and the body-worn cameras in particular. Those two I want to highlight. To date, the department has never been in compliance with the Prison Rape Elimination Act since its inception. Lord willing, we're going to be on pace in the next year to actually comply fully with it. One of the key components of complying with the Prison Rape Elimination Act is we have to have a full staffing model, because there's a lot of working parts to it. And without the personnel to man all these different functions, we're never going to be in compliance. And we're going to keep revisiting that concept of a fully staffed department, because there's a lot of things that are attached to that impacts the community, both positively and negatively. I inherited a department that was shrinking at 865 vacancies at the rank of deputy sergeant lieutenant, that is almost 10% of the department missing, which meant the other 90% left behind are doing all the work. And those are line staff positions, not administrative positions. So that means an even smaller group of people are covering what was missing. And that impacts obviously the budget, impacts overtime spent, impacts the quality of services delivered, and the ability to carry out all these functions, which includes the Prison Rape Elimination Act. Other item, body-worn cameras. My first week in office, we convened our subject matter experts and the ones in the technical services division, and I asked them, what are we doing with body cameras, where are we at, and how soon can we get it up and running? And we pared the proposal for my predecessor down to a cost of $13 million per year, instead of 239 personnel required to staff it, only 25. And we could have the first 5 stations up and running prior to the summer. This information was presented to the Board of Supervisors and the CEO, Sachi Hamai, and we're still waiting for an answer. We're ready to go. We wanted those body-worn cameras up yesterday. It turns out that the liability trust fund that our contract cities pay into, one of the underwriters is Lloyd's of London, and they actually require body-worn cameras as a best practice to continue in the underwriting capacity. So we had a need. The public demands it. We want it. It works for everyone's best interest. And now the ball's in the court of the people who appointed you to this commission. So I should expect from you to present that letter to them, get the body-worn cameras up and running. It's in their hands right now. Okay. And working my way down, the next one is about the third paragraph, where you say the recent statements and actions by LSD officials have turned back the clock on reforms and seriously eroded community trust. And then you go into the reinstatement of deputy sheriff, and you mention here previously fired for credible accusations of domestic violence. Okay, I'm going to pause there now. I want to introduce Assistant Sheriff Robin Limon, who was just promoted last week. And for the record, this is the first time in the history of the department that 2 of the top 4 executives are female. That is a historical moment. And I brought you here regarding the issue of domestic violence in our enforcement efforts.
Thank you. Thank you. Under the Sheriff's Department, we have 23 patrol stations throughout Los Angeles County. We handle thousands of calls, domestic violence calls, every year, and affect hundreds of arrests in regards to domestic violence. As a department, we take incidents of domestic violence very seriously. In fact, our personnel are not immune. Beginning in January 2010, we've had 3 incidents of arrests for department members. In January, a male employee and his wife were engaged in an argument that turned physical. Both he and his wife were arrested. In March, we had a female employee who was alleged to have assaulted her boyfriend, and she was arrested. We also had another female employee who assaulted her wife and was also arrested. 2 of these incidents were handled at our station level and subsequently investigated by our Internal Criminal Investigations Bureau. One of them was handled by an outside police department. Any perception that as a department we do not take domestic violence seriously is false. As I stated, our personnel are members of the community and they are not immune to it. I think I'll conclude with that.
Question about that?
Absolutely.
So you said that there were investigations. Can you tell us the outcome of those investigations? Was there any discipline imposed?
They're currently ongoing, so I cannot speak to that. The criminal investigation will have to run its course.
Okay, thank you.
Let me add to that actually one of the first terminations I did in office was for domestic violence. And that was an out-of-state incident that happened. And actually in the state of Nevada. Now, let me Let me expound a bit on that. And this is now, let's go into the particulars of the Mendoyan case. And I know we had this conversation with Commissioner Ocean that we started, and unfortunately I kind of cut myself off. And by cutting myself off of comment, I somehow led the impression that by the time that people make a complaint goes against them, or that it's not taken seriously because of the length of time. Actually, that is not the complete idea. It actually undermines the ability to prosecute successfully. In fact, when I actually just read on my phone a DA rejection case from a law enforcement officer, and they cited the delay in reporting as part of the reasons why they were not going to file a criminal case. So that actually, it's a hindrance. It makes it more difficult because the amount of time that elapses, obviously memories tend to fade. We lose the ability to gather evidence, to contact witnesses, and do a successful prosecution, which we want to do each and every time. Anyone who makes a report of domestic violence, any type of assault, and in fact any crime, we always take the victim at face value initially, that we're required to do that. And we prepare that first report. And now as an employer or as an investigating agency that's going to lead to a prosecution, we have to go from the allegation, now we have to be able to sustain it. We have to go through a very deliberate process of interviewing witnesses, establishing a timeline, identifying what happened and how can we, and then give enough information to the district attorney where they can prove it beyond reasonable doubt for the criminal filing. It's on the administrative side, we still have to go through the same due process. We can't now somehow adopt a lesser standard of due process because it's administrative instead of criminal. We still have to satisfy due process, means we have to have evidence, we have to have facts, we have to have witnesses to sustain our action. And we're going to go out of our way to do that. In fact, in the previous case, in this case in particular, what kind of troubled it from the start was, and I mentioned this in public comments prior, not in this group, but another group, it was three things. The standards, the guidelines for discipline, the 2012 standards, were changed in 2013 and 2015. And they were changed in a process that was done in secret, without comment, without participation of the certified bargaining units, what's called the meet and confer process. And that ALADS was the lead organization that challenged that through the Employee Relations Commission and unfair labor practice filing. And they succeeded and they won their case. The hearing officer recommended that the guidelines has to revert to 2012. And the commission voted on that and affirmed the decision of the hearing officer. And that was a unanimous vote. So now we have the guidelines for discipline have to revert to the 2012 standard. And that's going to bear not just on the Mendoyan case, but on hundreds of cases that have been adjudicated since that point in time. And we're currently in the process of going through what is the remedy, what is the appropriate remedy. And this is where we're parting ways with county council that's sitting across from me, because they're adopting the position of the Board of Supervisors and not the Sheriff's Department. We actually want to work and engage in the meet and confer process. We want to update the guidelines to make sure they include new stuff that wasn't present in 2012. And actually, as a product of the CCJV, one of them was a policy on inmate retaliation. These things, we need to add them to make sure that our guidelines for discipline remain current. But we can't do it by ourselves. We can't do it in secret. And that's the process that condemned this before the ERCOM decision. That's one issue. The second issue is what constitutes exculpatory information. We have the obligation to present all information, both incriminating and exculpatory, when we're conducting internal affairs investigation and internal criminal investigations. We have a responsibility to do both, to present both. So when we're making a decision whether or not to impose discipline, we can meet the standard, which is preponderance of evidence. If we omit evidence, then we're putting our finger on the scale of justice, and that is just constitutionally impermissible. In the case of Mendoyan, that is what happened. The internal affairs investigators deliberately omitted a memo that was written by Mr. Mendoyan on June 3rd of 2015. And the individual who presented the case for advocacy claimed it wasn't relevant to the case. I'm going to read you part of that memo, and you're going to ask yourself, why on earth would this not be included? It's very relevant to the case. There were two important witnesses. They were identified. One was interviewed, one was not interviewed, but they both had very important information that lends to the credibility of the allegations. They were both excluded from the presentation by Internal Affairs. So that's three separate pieces of evidence. One of them is a memo, two of them is testimony. They were not included in the investigation. So the decision that the department developed was not one that survives the standard of preponderance of evidence because they excluded evidence. You have to weigh the good and the bad and come up with an idea. And what we do have, when we weigh the totality of circumstances, it was a relationship that ended badly. It did not stray into the criminal arena. There was a component of it that involved a place of employment. And to that part, there was appropriate administrative action that was taken. However, to claim, and I'm going to quote now your letter. Where is it? Fired for credible accusations of domestic violence is not an accurate statement at all. Okay, and I'm going to read you the memo that was excluded. This memo was written on June 3rd of 2015. It was from Mendoyan Karen to Lieutenant Rodney Moore, who was his watch commander at the time. And it says here, background. I was in a 2-year relationship with blank, I'll leave it blank, which ended approximately 6 months earlier. The relationship towards the end was somewhat rocky with our share of arguments and disagreements. During our relationship, there was no law enforcement contact or any incidents. On June 3rd, 2015, at 17:19 hours, while working as Comp 1, which is a complaint desk, in South Los Angeles Station, I received a phone call from a blocked number. I answered myself when I heard a female voice yelling, profanity stating, "You stupid," I think the initials are MF here, "you're all F up." I listened for a few seconds and asked who this was. The female then, while still yelling, stated, "You know who this is." At this point, I recognized the voice as being my ex-girlfriend, I'll leave it blank. The female continued yelling on the phone, stating, "You can say goodbye to your blank job, you blank idiot. You're a blank idiot. When I'm done with you, you're going to need a psych approval to get your job back. You're a stupid blank blank." Okay, then it goes on. But that piece of information had to be an investigative file. And that's an important piece of information because it shows you the mindset of the person involved. It goes to credibility issues. And at a minimum, it allows for cross-examination. And when you're looking at the totality of circumstances and the two witnesses, both female, who were excluded from the internal affairs investigation, you have to ask yourself, what basis did they determine the preponderance evidence was? If they're excluding evidence that you have to weigh, good and bad. Preponderance evidence standard is 50% plus 1. It's not just the things I like and let me get rid of the things I don't like because it doesn't make my case. That is not due process. And that was a fatal flaw of this, one of the fatal flaws. The second fatal flaw was the issue of false statements. Hold on one second. Oh, there you go. And this goes down to, well, let me go on the false statement issue. If you interview someone 2 years, almost 2 years after the fact, you have to understand that time passes. Unless it's something very obvious and glaring, you can't say, aha, because they did or did not remember with specificity a particular detail. That's not a false statement. And that doesn't conform to the legal standard for what constitutes a false statement. The same thing with if you have evidence that now you have in your hands because you received it after the interview, you said, now I have this, and you can't go back to say, oh, but you said you didn't have it before. You have to actually acknowledge the fact that you get things after the fact. And to use that as a gotcha moment, aha, you didn't have this before, now you have it. That was a false statement before. That's artificial. So these are part of the many defects on the Mendoyan case. And these were not presented in the civil service hearing. These are outside of the investigative file, particularly these ones. So there are many concerns, and like I said, what you have is a bad breakup. It partway segued into workplace performance issues, or there was whether or not they're calling or not calling, stuff like that on the workplace, interrupting workplace, and anything that has to do with the workplace, we have to take seriously. If it does not take place in the workplace, we have to, at a minimum, make sure we have sufficient evidence and we're not engaging in a one-sided witch hunt. We have to acknowledge the totality of the relationship, because the failure to do that, we're actually harming other cases. We're harming cases where we have credible witnesses, we have credible victims, and we need to definitely make sure they're held accountable. And we're doing that right now, as Assistant Sheriff Limon said, in cases where, yeah, we have solid evidence. As a matter of fact, we have had cases where the suspect, in this case deputy, was filed on by the district attorney because there was sufficient to take a filing and take it to court. In this case, there was no filing. In fact, there was two deputy district attorneys, one who was a domestic violence expert, ruled there was insufficient evidence. There were a bunch of other things that harmed this case.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Yes.
One of the things that last time you were here, we had an exchange about the standard of proof, sort of in a hypothetical case, that would justify taking disciplinary action against the deputy up to and including termination, especially in the context of domestic violence. And your response to me was that you would like to see a conviction. And I'm wondering, is that still the case? Would you want to see a filing or a conviction before you felt comfortable recommending disciplinary action?
Actually, a conviction is not necessary. It's a slam dunk if you have the conviction. I mean, the law's already set. It's a slam dunk. But short of a conviction, you need to have some very substantial evidence that you can sustain to make, because remember, you're altering someone's entire life.
Yeah.
And if you're not entertaining the possibility, and this is any research effort, you always have to entertain the possibility what you're seeing is not the truth. And if you're not actually, checking out to verify, and nothing corroborates, nothing adds up, the timelines are wrong, you have no witnesses you're really on a very, very narrow limb, and there's nothing to support you to then just do it because you want to make a statement on behalf of other people that are actually victims of domestic violence. That does not work.
Yeah, so I guess my other point, I don't think anyone here or in the public would say there's any problem with due process, right? I think everyone thinks that no matter who you are, especially if there's a threat to your livelihood, you should have some degree of due process. The public wants to have due process. The public would like to have their complaints thoroughly investigated and to have some transparency. So I think everyone is in favor of that. I think the concern is, especially where this occurred, was according to the media reports, the timeline of when the Deputy Mendoyan was reinstated was well before the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was established, and before a clear process was in place. And I'm wondering if you could comment on those reports. And I know you've already commented for the Board of Supervisors, but I think it would also be helpful for the Commission to hear your thought process around the reinstatement of this deputy, because you're making claims to us that we don't have the full file, we don't have access to the full record, and so it's hard for us to assess either way whether there was sufficient evidence for the Civil Service Commission and for the internal processes that led to the discipline against this deputy. So setting the evidentiary question aside, because I don't think we can answer that question here, I have a process question, which is why was the deputy reinstated before the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that you ran on was established before there was feedback from this commission, the Board of Supervisors, the OIG, or other stakeholders?
That's a very good question. Well, first and foremost, this case was the one I had the most knowledge of because I heard about it during the campaign trail. And we actually gave an opportunity to the outgoing administration to have a second look at it. And actually the outgoing administration did something we weren't expecting. And they actually, I don't know if they set the stage, they had this thing force-fed on blast as soon as they entered office, because there was definitely a concerted effort to release information that was subject to the POAR restrictions. And it happened again and again and again, to the point now we had to actually launch a criminal inquiry to see who was actually releasing confidential personnel records. And so we're still working, we're still pursuing that. We already have a system in place that's been in place for decades, which is called case review. In this case, when we had it reviewed, it went through the standard case review protocols. My intention is to expand case review to be the Truth and Reconciliation process, invite more eyes into the process. Of course, we still, obviously, it has to be confidential because of the nature of the subject, but I do want other eyes to participate. And in fact, I want a member from the Office of Inspector General to actually participate as well. We gave you our first blush. We actually got some input from you and kicked it back. We tweaked it, changed again. I think we brought it back. And now I understand that you do not want to participate any longer because of your concern about the legality of the process, which that is your prerogative. However, the business of the organization moves forward, and actions I took are on solid legal ground. They're based on the California Constitution, the county charter, and you should recall that we terminate people in a very unilateral, single way by the authority of my office. And this is the same process in reverse. This is not unusual. We're going to hire, Lord willing, by the end of next year, all 865. We're going to get back to being a fully staffed in the span of 2 years. And how we did that? Because we told our employees that they're entitled to due process. They believe in the organization. They're recruiting in all the communities now. And the tide is done a 180. And that impacts everything else. It impacts our ability to send our deputies to training, because we're only at 22% compliance rate in continued professional training. Now when we have a fully staffed model, we can get everybody trained to the minimum standards that the state mandates, which means we have the opportunity to minimize deadly use of force, de-escalate dangerous situations. All these things, good things, happen when we have a fully staffed model. It doesn't happen when the perception is we're an unfair employer that mistreat our employees and wrongfully terminate them. We overcame that perception. And now we're bearing the fruit of that. And that's a very positive for the community, for the department. And I stand on principle in the things I do. I don't take that lightly. And if I'm going to alter someone's career, someone's life, is because I have the facts to sustain it. And as we indicated, I've already fired a few individuals, terminated some employments. And we're going to continue to do that when we have the facts that support that action. Short of that, I'm not going to chop people's heads off, because I still have to have them gainfully employed, engaged, serving the community, representing the best interests of the community. And we have to improve on how we treat our employees.
Cheryl, it's interesting you use the term chop somebody's head off.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is maybe the third time that I've sat and listened to you in a couple of different settings give bits and pieces of this case. And each time it brings in a little piece of this confidential information that we're not supposed to know about of this case. Get a little bit over here and a little bit over here. And I think at some point you said, if this was all revealed, everybody would see the bright light, I think that's what you said, on this case on how bogus the allegation was. On behalf of battered women who make reports, I feel like you are chopping their heads off by giving pieces of information of a particular case. We're not the Civil Service Commission. We're not in your department. We're not a jury. But my head's spinning from getting little bits and pieces of this particular case, one-sided. I don't know what to do with that. And I'm not saying that you may not, you obviously believe that there was a wrong done to this employee and apparently other employees. But what we're getting on this case over and over again are little bits and pieces of commentary, evidence, quotes. Now we have today you're reading, I guess supposedly that was the victim on the phone. I don't know if that was the victim on the phone, and I don't know if that was a real threat or somebody being upset because they got beaten up. I don't know. So at this point, I almost feel like the details of this case, as they're presented, not helping. It's not helping us want to support a reconciliation and truth panel. Because we're only getting bits and pieces. We don't get the whole story. We cannot know the whole story. All of this is confidential information. But you have the opportunity, you know the confidential information, and you can drop it here, and you can drop it there, and you can drop it there. I don't think it's helping. I don't think it's helping you. I don't think it's helping us get to the next stage about developing how we're going to work together as the COC and the Sheriff's Department. And on behalf of battered women, I just don't think it's fair. People who are harmed and want to report. Do we know that these cases are complicated? Are relationships messy? Are people upset? All of those things happen. But that's the process. All of that can be part of domestic violence also. It doesn't mean something didn't happen.
I agree with you entirely, ma'am, and I'll submit to you that, one, you put this item on the agenda again, you disseminate it, you put it on your public website, so you're keeping the issue alive, and I'm here to address it, and the Board of Supervisors who appointed all of you, and you're as beholden to them as you claim my Truth and Reconciliation panel would be beholden to me. There's no different. You're a political appointment. And the fact is, we do take domestic violence seriously. We take due process seriously, and it's a delicate balancing act. And the message we want to communicate is that no matter what it is, we're here to help. And in fact, I just got an email this weekend, and it was from a horrible domestic violence case up in the High Desert, where the victim was kidnapped, and she got a message to a friend of hers to call the sheriff to come help her. So she didn't heed the missed message trying to communicate by this body or by the Board of Supervisors that somehow we don't take domestic violence seriously. I'd say quite the opposite. We're dead serious about domestic violence, and wherever it is, we're going to do our best to stop it.
Can I make a comment? I want to say respectfully, Sheriff, that I personally take offense to the statement that we are political appointments. Let me say that, just let me speak for myself. My allegiance is not to the Board of Supervisors as a collective unit, neither to the Board of Supervisor or the supervisor who appointed me. We're here to do a job, just as you're here to do a job. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to do our job, but we can't do our job independent of full disclosure of the facts. And what Chair Giggins have voiced is we become handicapped when there's a drip, drip, drip effect. You was here on last month, and we applaud you and commend you for your presence and your participation in our meeting. However, last month, as you have come today, we're hearing something today that we did not hear last month. Were you not aware of the information that you just read to us as it relates to the document that was presented by one of the parties involved in this dispute? Is this some new information for you? Did you have it last month? Did you have it when you first came into office? I think that's what we're trying to get at. And I just want to be clear that I vehemently deny that statement and repudiate it, and it should be rejected.
I second that, and I take offense at the accusation that we are political appointees and beholden to the Board of Supervisors. We are an independent body. We make independent recommendations. That is the only way we can be responsive to the community, and the only way that we can assist the sheriff in making improving its relationship with the community and in developing policies. So please put that view where it belongs and disabuse yourself of that belief, because we are an independent body, and as you could tell from the strong voices among us on the commission, we all feel very much the same way.
I want to actually agree with you. I am not one for a fan of drip drip anything. If anything, this case was a drip drip from the very beginning, but it was a very, very one-sided drip drip affair. If you look at from how the entire event unfolded since I took office, it's been a very one-sided drip drip drip. I'm just trying to give, within my legal limitations, to give a balanced totality of the situation. And there are no winners in this case, okay? If someone was possibly harmed, that's one case. If someone was possibly a victim of domestic violence, that's another case. Does this impact other cases? It does not. Because this case was elevated in the political echo chamber, in a sense. But it wasn't done so on behalf of other victims of domestic violence. I disagree with that entirely, because if anything, both the Board of Supervisors, both this body, should be reassuring everyone in the public that the Sheriff's Department takes issues of domestic violence seriously, and will do everything within our power to handle the calls for service, separate the parties when possible, investigate them impartially, objectively, and we come to a conclusion that we can actually make a decision to deprive someone of their liberty, well, then we're going to do so. We're going to take someone to jail, and we're going to present the case for prosecution, and we're going to do that. And we are, in fact, as we speak right now, I guarantee you there's someone doing that right as we speak. So the message that this body needs to communicate, and the way I'm communicating, is we're relentless when it comes to pursuing incidents of domestic violence, and we will not stop till every vulnerable person is cared for.
Good. Within your legal limitation, is the commission privileged to be privy to whatever working knowledge you have of the case? What are we privileged to be exposed to within your legal limitation of that which you have to keep to yourself?
Under normal circumstances, everything is privileged. In this case in particular, because there's so many things that were put into the public, it's kind of, we're in a gray area. And actually, I agree with you, that's a good question. And I want to find the answer to that question. All right, so I'm going to get back to you on that.
I don't think there's gray area when it comes to employee confidentiality. Personally, I don't think there is gray area when it comes to that.
Well, no, I agree with you in that part, but the problem is...
But we've been getting all these different pieces of this case. Anyway, Commissioner Bonner.
Yeah, just to, by the way, underscore, and I think you've gotten the message, but neither I nor anybody on this commission is beholden to the Board of Supervisors or any member of the board. So just understand that. But here's my question, and if you can answer it. Wasn't there substantial evidence that Deputy Montoya attempted to break into the house of his former girlfriend number one, and didn't he attempt to do that after a restraining order had been issued by a court? Can you answer those questions, sir?
It's a negative in both cases. There was a temporary restraining order that was not, neither party went to court to have it completed. The issue, and then now we're going into details, all I can say is no on both cases.
You know, it's been publicly reported that there's videotape of that, but I don't know because we don't have access.
That's part of the drip that you're talking about. See, that was the drip from the other side. And actually, you know what I can say, is the fact that Mr. Mendoza was actually living there, which automatically puts the whole issue about who's breaking into where in doubt, and the fact that his mistake was not actually calling the police to accompany him to retrieve his property. It's a common call. It's called keep the peace, where one party needs the presence of law enforcement while the other party retrieves it. That's probably his mistake right there. But
You could be living with someone and have a temporary restraining order that means you can't show up at those premises. We all know that. But you know, I'm starting to get a headache again because now we're litigating this case that is, I think, Sheriff, I just want to offer, this is such a distraction. We keep coming back to it. I don't want to come back to it. It seems like there's all, your idea of wanting to make amends in your department, I think a skill that you have, which is very admirable. It seems that you connect to the rank and file, to your employees. That is such a skill. If I might offer, please don't be mad at me, that if you use that skill to move forward, bring all of us moving forward on the reforms that you say you want, the reforms you promise, right? It would be so fantastic. If I never hear another thing, frankly, about this particular case, but I am concerned about a panel being created based on this one case. So that's the piece that has, wider ramifications. You get my point?
no, I get your point. Actually, that's pretty funny. I appreciate it. I'm going to get past this case. Believe it or not, the rest of the world does have a lot of things to do. And one of them is, in the Truth and Reconciliation process, I'm on solid legal standing to do what I'm doing, only because I can point to statutory law, constitutional law, and case law, all three. And the fact that every single person that I hire, I'm the appointing authority. I hire every single person, particularly the deputy sheriffs who come on the job. And we're going to hire 1,000 this year. We're on pace. We're going to hire 1,000 next year. And that's part of the job that I'm supposed to do. I'm also going to terminate people during that process. And they get terminated before they go to Civil Service Commission, not after. Actually, we make the decision within the department. So I think the context sometimes get lost when you have these other bodies. But the Truth and Reconciliation is actually, just like I did with the captain selection process at the station level, I'm actually giving authority away because it's not my decision now. It's going to be the panel's decision. Does someone qualify to be reinstated or not? It's not my decision. The same thing when we change the method that our station captains are selected now. It's a committee, an ad hoc committee, a panel of community members. In the past, it was, I made the decision. Now we vet them, now the committee makes the decision. The city of Palmdale just did that. The city of West Hollywood just did it last week. And we got 9 more to go. So we're actually changing the way we do business as it can get lost in the shuffle and all the dust about, oh my God, Mendoyan. But in reality, we're changing the way we do business because we want to be more responsive to the public. We want to be more reflective of the community. We want to hire locally. We're doing everything to build that trust between ourselves, our operation, the community. And it's right, Commissioner Ocean, and there's been a lot of bad things that happened in the past that caused that trust to be frayed. And particularly some communities a lot more than others. And we're working every angle we have to improve that in every facet of our operation. And I want to encourage you actually to take a look at that policy, and we're going to move forward. And we'll have other people look at it. If you don't want to look at it, we'll have other people look at it. But it's well within my constitutional legal ability to do so, and actually it's an exercise in expanding how many people are looking at the situation and incidents, terminations in this case, also on wrongful convictions. If there's evidence that we did some wrongdoing, I want to hear about that too. I want other people to look at it. There's people lined up waiting to have their certain cases heard.
Okay, we have a couple more commissioners. Vera, please. Commissioner Vera.
I think our chair said it well, that it's not the issue with that individual case, that the way that this was rolled out, we see as doing damage to the institution, the community. It's not necessary to have such a visible fight with the county and county council to roll something out, the contours of which are still in the law possibly vague. County council could be right, they could be wrong, you could be right, you could be wrong. We get what you're trying to do, and it's your prerogative to say, look, I'm going to fight for the due process rights of the deputies, and that's great. But in rolling it out this quick, in a way that has such a fight, I think that that's causing damage. And so if there are ways that there could be more dialogue with the county council, with other stakeholders to say, look, this is the goal. Some parts I may be able to do, some parts maybe not, might be unclear, but let's go through the process so we can have some type of agreement. Not on individual cases, but on things like composition, what remedies, how far back, how many people, all those things that I think the county, and I've watched some of the supervisor meetings online, and I think those are their concerns. Like, this is new to everyone. What can be done within the law? And I think obviously you want to do right by the law, and so does the county. So that's the first thing in this letter. The second point we're trying to say is, let's hopefully have a reset sort of our relationship, right? Where you've come to these meetings, we really want to work with you, but there are, like any relationship, some hiccups in that, and we want to convey to you that we want to be partners. We really need this information. Like I said earlier, we're volunteers. We don't have an agenda, but we'd like to be included in the process as important policies get vetted and discussed, so we're not on the back end hearing about it in the newspaper. Instead, we can be working with your staff to give our input on that. That's really what we want to do, and we want to be able to add value in that way. So I think that's partly what the letter was trying to convey, is those things, the disappointment in the process, and sort of an invitation and hope that we can continue to work together in even better ways.
If your letter said that would have been a home run. Unfortunately, it doesn't say that. I think one sentence says it at the very end, and I'm going to read that sentence. The COC is committed to continuing to push for reform in the LSD, and we're hopeful that you will wholeheartedly join us in this effort. Recognize that when I ran for office, my platform was reform, rebuild, restore. And the pace of reform might make people uncomfortable, and hindsight's 20/20, and I actually agree with everything you said. And I want you to be a part in this process. But recognize that I defeated a political establishment that's not very happy, and they front-loaded things to cast me in the most negative light possible, and that's just reality. That's why this was all over the news early on. In all the details and all the drip that you spoke of, it was calculated. It wasn't by mistake. And I'd like to see that reset as well, because I think I need you to provide me the advice so I can make informed decisions. You have a proper role. It's a very important role. And I respect that, and I need that. But if you withhold it because you want to wait to see the legal, I'm pretty sure they'll hold that legal fight for 4 years, and that's not going to fly. My pace is different.
That is...
Yeah, I think from my perspective, this letter was born out of great frustration and disappointment that since you took office, this commission has made numerous requests for meetings, for documents, for materials. At the same time, there has been a response, we want to work with you, and then we get nothing in return. So now you are once again going on record, and I hope this time it really does work. Because as Commissioner Vera said, we can do our best work when we work together in terms of helping the department improve its policy and communication with the community. I have made numerous requests, and I keep getting rebuffed as to who you have determined to be your constitutional policing advisors. Can you give us that information at this point?
We haven't made a final decision yet. We've actually had quite a amount of interest. I think about 18 people applied for the job. We interviewed the top 5, and we still haven't made a decision on that yet. But that will come very shortly. But there's other issues that arose since we're doing this, and that is, in essence, the conflict with county council, particularly the county's chief county council and the relationship between the board of supervisors, county council, and the sheriff's department. And that is the issue that's now playing out, and how is that resolved? Because I need county council that actually, I'm the client. I can't have county council whose client is the board of supervisors. That's a conflict. Inherent conflict. We already have conflict counsel on one issue, but now the issue is mushroomed into bigger issues. For example, the IRCOM decision. I want to work on the remedy. The board of supervisors still wants to fight and appeal the decision. We're past that. Let's work on the remedy now, how we can result in a new and updated guidelines for discipline. An example. So but that's not your fight, that's mine.
Right.
And but just to be aware that it complicates everything else we're doing, where we're still going this back and forth.
I promise I'll truncate it. Just in brief, the paper that you read from, the letter that you read from the deputy, is it possible you can share that with the commission? Would you be willing to share that with us?
I'll have to ask from the source if I can release it.
Okay.
Because we have to redact information on it.
Okay. Might I interject here? I have a little disagreement. Sure. Again, this is more dribs and drabs. We're going to see the whole case. Are we going to meet the person who made the claim? Are we going to meet Mr. Mendoyan? You want to come here and have what are we doing? I'm not so sure that we should drill down any further on the details of who did what to whom. I don't think that's our role to decide the merits of this particular case. There was concern about somebody with serious allegations of domestic violence who got rehired back to the law enforcement agency that is supposed to protect and serve people who are harmed from domestic violence. That's the fundamental issue. That's what we're concerned about. The details of the case, we can't have all the information. I don't see how it's going to help us to get some pieces in writing when we don't get the whole thing, or actually, I don't know what our role is. What are you thinking? How will that help you?
Let's adjourn and come back next month.
Anyway, we've come to the end of our time. We're about to get kicked out by MTA. So, very lively discussion as always. I think that's going to be kind of our relationship for a while, Sheriff. It's kind of part of the zeitgeist right now. Again, we're glad that you're here. We're glad we can have these very direct conversations with you. I, too, all of the commissioners, wish we could get off this one dime and move on and build a trust between the COC and the sheriff, between the COC and the community, between the sheriff and the COC. And I guarantee you that every one of the people here are completely independent. I have no control over them as chair. So I'm going to tell you, none of us are owned by anybody, and we are here completely, in our own human beingness, who we are.
I'm encouraged by actually the difference in opinion on the ICE issue, so that actually is encouraging, because that's a sign of a healthy, vigorous debate.
Right.
And I'll participate when I can. But rest assured, I think we're actually, in our own way, we're actually pursuing the same goal, which is advance the public's interest.
Right, absolutely. Okay. Thank you, everyone. We're done for today. See you next month for the next episode.